All right, so let's touch on. We both giggled a little bit at linear periodization. I have been a huge advocate of linear periodization on YouTube. I've probably talked about it more than anyone I can think of anyway off the top of my head. Derek here has deep issues with the term linear periodization itself. So go ahead and make me look like an idiot, Mr. Dr. Man.
Well, it comes down just to the terminology. It's not necessarily the method, but linear periodization, the word periodization means specific periods. And when you have something that's linear, you can't have a period that, works in a straight line because the periods all kind of intersect and they stop being periods. So normally what we call that is linear progressions, where you start with 10s, do a week or two of that, and then move to 8s and 6s, 5s, 4s, 3s, 2s, and 1s, and you ascend in intensity. But when you think of that in periods, there isn't one. It's just a big period of training where you went from lighter, doing more, to doing less with heavier weight. In periodization, we do what's called working with concentrated loads, where we do a high volume phase, where we call that general prep or hypertrophy oriented phase. We're doing
the 10s.
Yeah, the 10s, yeah. I even go up to 15s a lot of times on cut phases to help with, calorie expenditure and things like that. And there's also good hypertrophy benefits. And it also creates a sensitivity to going back to 10s, 5s, etc. But we, that high volume phase will stick there for a while until the progress has been minimized because you're adapted to it. And then we move to a specific prep or transmutation phase that Verkhoshansky coined, where we're doing 5s and 3s, somewhere in that area. And then we'll have an absolute strength phase where we're doing 2s and 3s. And then competition phases is where we do the actual peaking and overreaching to make sure everything peaks at exactly the right time for competition day. So you can see how we have periods of training phases that are separated by different qualities, and linear periodization as a concept doesn't necessarily have those separations in what you're trying to achieve. It just kind of flows. So a linear progression is what we would normally call that.
He just described exactly pretty much how my traditional training goes. My last meet, I decided to do something experimental and it didn't work out. So, but yeah, what you mentioned in there though about having your clients do 15s specifically during a cut phase. If you could elaborate on that, because it's kind of a misnomer out there that most people think you need to keep the intensity up and keep the reps down to not lose as much strength when you're cutting. And I've heard you talk about this a while back. I've seen Dr. Mike talk about it as well too. And if you could elaborate on that here for these people to see.
For sure. When we're talking about cut phases and then also programming the training around to accentuate the effects that we're trying to get in a cut phase, once you reduce your calories, your body is going to start adapting to the amount of energy or potential energy that you're taking in. If that is reduced, your body, when it's running here and you're eating this many calories, if you drop the calories down, your body's going to be like, oh shit, I don't have as much as I did. I better start getting more efficient and start using the calories better for what I have. And it starts moving your metabolic baseline down toward what you're eating. So that's a form of adaptation. Once you hit there, you stop losing weight. Very common concept, everybody goes through it. And then you can either reduce the calories or you can increase your calorie expenditure from training. So you go add cardio or you do more work in the weight room. So an easy way to plan this out, if you're going to do a 12-week cut phase, is we're going to start here. Our calorie expenditure is there. Our calorie intake is right here. We'll drop this, and over the course of a few weeks, your body will adapt, and then you stop losing weight. And the first block of a cut phase, normally for me, is doing a 5x5. So we're going to do sets of 5. Not that hard, but you're still putting in a lot of work. So that keeps my calorie expenditure pretty steady. And after I make a reduction, I start getting adapted to that. It takes a few weeks. And then after that, I'll normally add in a block of 10. So 4 weeks of 3x10s, 5x10s, especially if we're trying to, keep the calories burned. And that's a really good hypertrophy stimulus anyway. So the calorie expenditure, even though you're adapted to this certain basal metabolic rate, is going to go back up because you're doing more work, almost double the work at that point, depending on how many exercises that you do. So the calorie expenditure goes up. You haven't had to really cut your calories back down, and you put yourself in a calorie deficit again to where you will start losing weight. Now, one of the tricky things with this, and it's a big reason that I ask for more things than just body weight for my clients, is you start adding in that extra volume. Your muscle glycogen storage will go up. What comes with muscle glycogen? Water. So it's similar to sodium in that way, it just doesn't hold as much water per molecule. So if you're sore, you have inflammation. Inflammation is retention of fluid for those affected areas. And when you have that, you're also going to retain more water. So if your waist is getting smaller, if your hips, especially for females, if your hips are getting smaller because they have a predisposition to lose or gain body fat in those areas, if your hips are getting smaller, waist is getting smaller, but your weight is staying the same, your total volume is going down, but your weight is the same, or your mass, you're technically getting denser. That means your body composition is improving, regardless of what the scale says. It lies, folks. The scale is a liar. We need more information than just the scale to know what's going on. So if you see those changes happening, but you're not losing weight, don't freak out. It'll be okay. The scale will normally reflect that later. But the same thing happens during that block of tens. With the calorie expenditure being up here, your metabolic rate is going to start adjusting again anyway. You'll be adapted to training, you're more adapted to the calorie intake. Lo and behold, the last 4 weeks of the cut cycle, we go to 15s, usually 3 to 4 sets of 15, maybe 5, 6, depending on the circumstances. It happens. Short rest, you can get it in. It's possible. I've done it. Don't know if I'll do it again. But it's that sequential changing of what's going on, and you're changing the stimulus to something different, yet it's still kind of similar to what you were doing before. So if you go from 5s straight to 15s, you're going to cause a whole lot of damage and fatigue to accumulate, and it's probably going to be too much and going to stall out quicker. But if you can do it incrementally over the phase of 3 or 4 weeks, which is the normal amount of time for your body to adjust to many things in training and or calorie intake, nutrient intake, whatever, if you can plan that in a sequence as you go along to exploit the sensitivities that you've created earlier in the training phase, then you don't plateau. You continue losing weight because you're always going to be chasing that calorie deficit either by increased work or by dropping the calories.
Would this be a linearly periodized sequence?
It would be periodized. It has a linear trend, if that makes you feel any better. But it's more dips and drops and
right.
Waves in a similar direction instead of just going.
You want to plug RP a little bit here? I've been in the Renaissance Periodization Diet group probably since close to its inception, and the before and afters in there are really amazing. From your average, soccer moms, if that's a PC term to say today, regular people, athletes, etc. Who are kind of some bigger names that are now on with RP that you can think of?
Well, for the CrossFit fans, Rich Froning's been on with RP for a few years now, at least. He's done the templates, he's done the coaching, he's using the app, he's doing all those things. And he really fits that to what he does as an athlete now. And even though it's changed, I don't think he does the individual CrossFit competitions anymore. It's more team oriented. So. But me personally, I've been working with pro wrestlers. We've had some of those guys join in because they have to be able to perform physically at a really high level.
For sure.
Extremely high skill level, not only for themselves, but to keep the guys that they're working with safe.
Right.
I've been lucky enough to work with Rowan. Eric Rowan from WWE, Sin Cara, EC3, who's, that guy's jacked beyond belief. Anyway.
If you don't know who some of these guys are, especially EC3, Google him and look at his physique. He is incredibly jacked while being able to, move and be agile and, like Derek said, protect his fellow workers.
Yep. Isaiah Swerve Scott, keep an eye on him. He's going to be huge in the next, I would say, 5 years or so. He's developing right now, and he's working on the physique. To where, he's got all kinds of crazy talent inside the ring. Adam Cole, who's the NXT champion right now. I've been lucky enough to work with him and his girlfriend, Britt Baker, Dr. Britt Baker, the dentist from AEW, who's an incredible wrestler herself. And I'm really excited to see how those guys are able to change their physique. But one of the big things we battle with guys that travel like this, and I've had tons of clients that have the same kind of issues, is how do you meet your macros when you're running in and out of airports?
You're right.
You're always on the road. These guys driving hours and hours to get to the shows. And I've always been known, especially when I'll travel around for powerlifting, go train at different gyms and learn from different people. I was known as a gas station nutritionist. So even when you're on the go and you have, all this package, or sometimes, just processed food is the only option that you have, you can go grab jerky. You've got your protein source. You can grab almonds. You've got a good fat source there. You can grab, Rice Krispies for quick energy or higher glycemic index carb. You can grab, rice bars or protein bars, anything like that. The macros are there, folks. You just got to go look at the packages. And a lot of my clients that travel for work, and even the ones, go out to dinner and have to entertain clients, we really work on making the good decisions on specific scenarios, being in restaurants. Don't be afraid to specify your order in a restaurant. You don't have to eat everything that's on the plate that they serve you.
Right. I've worked in restaurants before. My wife works in restaurants currently. You can go into any chain restaurant, Applebee's, Chili's, insert restaurant here, and say, I want 8 ounces of grilled chicken breast and steamed broccoli, and they will make it for you.
100%. And you were asking about Dr. Mike's stories. If you ever get to go out with Dr. Mike Israetel to a restaurant, especially if he's on a cut, he will be talking to that waiter or waitress for 5 minutes, specifying the order. But, that's his top priority, is making progress, bodybuilding, long-term progression.
Right.
All those little decisions that you make when you're thinking, I don't know if I want to bother them with this, or hold up the ordering process. If you take that, extra 60 seconds, maybe, in real life, it's probably less than that.
Right.
Just to specify your order. Like, can I get the steamed broccoli instead of the broccoli with the sauce on it? Can I get maybe a brown rice instead of a white rice if you serve that? Those kinds of things. It's those little decisions over time really accumulate a lot. And Dr. Mike was the man with that all the time. Even when he was getting his master's, 12 years ago when I first met him, he was specifying all those things, because if you can control what you put in your body, you control what your body does. And it really, those are the things that are important when you're traveling.
Right. And I promise you, somebody's ordered something weirder. So don't hesitate to ask for it specifically how you want to. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So any other tea on Dr. Mike, or is that pretty well?
Oh, well, Dr. Mike's just always been completely encompassed with his bodybuilding goals. He was studying hypertrophy research in his undergrad, and we were having discussions on the potential interference of cellular signaling after hypertrophy training if you took in anti-inflammatory drugs like NSAIDs or ibuprofen, any of those things. And we were, debating back and forth on what the research said. And lo and behold, the more research has come out, it's actually pretty true. Even to the effect of, if you take an ice bath after you do hypertrophy training, it'll actually nullify some of the inflammation. And the signaling for the inflammation is actually what helps signal for hypertrophy as well. So a lot of those metabolic factors, the chemical changes inside the muscle that signal for more hypertrophy. And that's not the number one cause for hypertrophy to signal for. It's actually tension in the muscle. So if you have muscle fiber here, and they flex, or they're under a certain load and they get pulled this way, the little piece of tissue in between them is called a costomere. And those have mechanoreceptors, or just things that pick up tension. And when those pick up tension, they send satellite cells, they proliferate, they donate to the muscle fibers, and that's actually the main reason we get hypertrophy. So it's the tension and the force that we produce in the lifting, and then the accumulated effect of doing it over and over and over again. Volume. But with the metabolic responses that we were talking about, the research actually showed that he was pretty much right with that. So if you knock out the inflammation using drugs or ice, then you're not going to get all the hypertrophy signaling that you want to create the increases.
So again, just a basic theory based on observation, going into studying it and trying to figure it out, and lo and behold, it was proven in this case.
Yep.
So speaking of studies and going on things of that nature, you've been working with an NHRA drag racer.
Yeah.
Clay Millican.
Clay Millican. Yeah. Tennessee's own.
Tennessee's own, exactly. And if you guys haven't noticed by now, like ETSU is a great school for all things exercise and physiology related. There's really probably not many, if any, places like it in the country, and it's just in little old Johnson City, Tennessee. But let's talk about what you're doing with Clay Millican. What kind of studies, what you're looking for, what kind of data you're collecting, etc.
Well, the project with Clay actually started as a kind of a research project in a way. We wanted to figure out what kind of forces that the driver was taking inside one of these extremely violent race cars, because Clay actually holds the elapsed time record in the NHRA for going 1,000 feet. They had to shorten the track from a quarter mile. 1,000 feet from a dead stop, he went 3.62 seconds at 335 miles an hour.
That's just insane.
If you can only imagine being stopped, and then by the time you go less than a quarter of a mile, going 330 plus miles an hour, there's a shitload of force there. And one of the big things with the NHRA has been driver safety, because there were, I guess it was 10, 15 years ago in that time range, it seemed like there was a driver getting killed in those classes every other year, whether it was in testing. One guy actually got shook to death inside the car.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't,
Goodness.
and he didn't hit anything. It was just the tires went into what's called tire shake, where those huge tires, they end up not accelerating at the right rate after they get going for a minute, and they start running over themselves, and it creates a harmonic vibration throughout the entire car. So they created new chassis developments for that and whatnot. But
it's more than just pressing the gas pedal and going straight.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's extremely, extremely complicated. The guys that run those cars or tune them and set them up are engineers at the highest level, some of the smartest people I've ever met. But my concern was, we know what the car is going through as far as the G forces and the acceleration and then the deceleration, but what is the driver specifically going through? So we put an accelerometer on him. We had heart rate measures, and we could tell how fast he was breathing, all kinds of different things like that. And we were looking at, what his heart rate was doing, how fast he could recover after a run. Because believe it or not, with a heart rate monitor on, once he stomped on the loud pedal. That's what he calls it. Once he does that, you don't have a heart rate monitor on the planet that's going to pick up shit. Because he's actually in a chassis that's oscillating at 2 Gs, just doing that as he's driving. And it only gets worse the faster he goes. So the G forces that he was actually experiencing compared to the 3 or 4 Gs on takeoff that the chassis would feel, he was feeling up to 7 Gs. Yeah, it was intense.
Wow.
And then the bigger end of that is when they're decelerating, when you're already going 330 something miles an hour, you hit the parachute and you let off the loud pedal. At the same time, we saw G forces on his body up to 14 negative, just throwing him forward.
God.
So it was unbelievable, and that changes the whole lot in general. But it really shows that those guys driving those cars, especially, are athletes.
And just for reference, guys, if some of you aren't car people, they're going 0 to 300 miles an hour in 3.5 seconds. Your fastest exotic street cars do 0 to 60 miles an hour, give or take, in around that time.
Yep. By the time one of these cars, the top fuel cars, big wings, long cylinder bodies, by the time they move 1 car length from where they start, they're already going 100 miles an hour.
That's just insane.
Yep. By the time the rear wing gets to where the front wheel started, 100 miles an hour in less than a second.
Jeez. Now, were y'all able to take this data with Clay and apply that in any sort of practical manner to help aid in his performance on the track?
Yes.
Elaborate, please.
I can't.
You can't. But it works. So sometimes, you got to figure out the what's before you can figure out the whys.
100%.
If you figure out that what works, this works, okay, we're going to do this, and we'll figure out why it's working as we go. All we know right now is that it is working, and we're winning.
Yep. With Clay, you know, he wanted to be stronger so he could be more resilient in the car. And we worked a lot of nutrition aspects to help him be the best he could be on race day. And we tested a lot of things with him there. And it's all a big proprietary blend that I'm not allowed to tell anybody about. But as sports scientists, we know the variables that go into human performance very well. And whether it's football, baseball, whether you want to do a high jump, ski jumping, bobsled, all the way into motorsports, we know how the body functions, and we know the function we're trying to apply it to in a specific activity or sport. And with Clay, we were able to take that outside the normal realm of field sports or Olympic sports and apply it to motorsports. And I really think that there's going to be a big market for that relatively soon. Formula One in Europe has already gone through a lot of that with the physical training and the nutrition and all that. But with American motorsports, there's a lot to be exposed in that regard.
Cigarettes and Mountain Dew.
Yeah, for sure.
Sort of transition that you talk about field sports and applying things differently. You've competed and coached in a number of strength sports, which is what the majority of the people watching this are going to be interested in. Kind of contrast the different training philosophies and how, you know, powerlifting differs from weightlifting, differs from strongman, etc.
Well, if we're talking about strength sports specifically, strongman, obviously you're going to have a lot more general physical preparedness. You still have to have that absolute strength threshold to be able to pull off the maneuvers and be competitive. You know, a squat is a squat. It doesn't matter if you're doing it with a barbell with calibrated disc plates on it, or they're giant,
right?
You know, voluptuous looking orbs on the end of a bar like the old strongman barbells.
And you're starting to see now kind of a 900-pound deadlift is the prerequisite to being a top strongman anymore.
Yeah, for sure. Especially with straps on.
Yeah.
And a lot of the research with straps is it adds maybe 10% thereabout. And that's extremely individualized. So
5 pounds for me.
Yeah. Gotcha. But, you know, with powerlifting, it's so incredibly specific. You're not going into the weight room to train to get better at something different. You're going into the weight room and refining your technique. You're, you know, hyper analyzing all the mechanics to make sure that what you're doing is transferring to what you do on the platform. Farther away from competition, you can mix things up, you know, but within the 2-3 months leading up to a competition, you're going to be doing your competition lifts generally in your competition techniques and stances and whatnot. Just because it has to be absolutely dialed in. Half of it's just practice making it good and getting things like your leg drive timed right. So that's, you know, even though you're laid down, you're still having to do an athletic movement and being coordinated to make all those things work right and optimize the technique. With strongman, you can kind of go in and do squat, bench, deadlift and however you want to do it. The forms might be a little bit more loose because the application is a little bit more general.
Right.
With weightlifting, or Olympic lifting, as the interweb calls it, it was weightlifting before it ever got into the Olympics.
It's only Olympic weightlifting in the Olympics.
Yeah, exactly. With that, it's actually a really interesting transfer from powerlifting or general strength in general to weightlifting, because with weightlifting, you're actually lifting the weight to get it into position to explode when you're in that mid-thigh area. When the bar gets anywhere between the middle of your femur to your, you know, hip joints, to where you have the most leverage, that's when you really actually accelerate. Everything before that is just getting in position. Sometimes you can get in position a little quicker to aid that acceleration, but more advanced stuff than you really need to go into. The interesting part of that part of the biomechanics being emphasized in weightlifting, it's exactly where powerlifters relax. We don't train that in the least. Once we get to that mid-thigh position, that's when you go and you try and fudge your deadlift around the sides. Just do whatever you can do to get the judges to pass it. But instead of really pulling back, keeping your posture tight and then exploding, Andy Bolton was an incredible example of this. He was at ETSU, over 10 years ago, I think, at one of the Night of the Living deadlift contests run by Alex Campbell, which I did, I think, 5 times. One time doing a weightlifting meet immediately beforehand. I still had my weightlifting shoes and singlet on as I was driving, trying to change my shoes to drive to the next meet venue, which I was a little bit late to, but I did get deadlifting. But anyway, Andy Bolton came and did the ISO pull test, which is a pull on force plates so we can measure how much force is generated going into the ground, which is where it always goes. And we put him in a mid-thigh position. Andy Bolton's the first guy to ever deadlift over 1,000 pounds in the world, regardless of circumstance, as far as I know.
Still only one of two to do it in a powerlifting meet.
Right. So that it doesn't really get more elite than that. And I know he's rack pulled up around 1,400, maybe 1,500 pounds, because he talked about doing that in training, all strapped up and whatnot. But with the ISO pull, we strap up and we actually put duct tape or gorilla tape, sometimes if you have somebody super strong, around the hands to fasten to the bar so grip is not the limiting factor. So we put Andy Bolton, not me specifically, it was a little bit before I started the program. Andy Bolton gets into the mid-thigh pull position like a weightlifter would, and he's not pulling very much. And people were so confused, especially guys that weren't familiar with both sports. Like, why can't you, get in this position? Why can't you pull more? You're like, I don't think you're really trying. This isn't going to be useful. But it was useful in a way that they weren't expecting.
Right.
We had, people that were training the weightlifting movements and derivatives that were used to exploding in that mid-thigh position that were pulling more as far as newtons created or force. That's how you measure force, it's in newtons. But we had, D1 athletes, track athletes, that could ISO pull more than Andy Bolton. But it was because he never trained that specific position, even though he was one of the strongest people in the world. So that's why you don't usually see people that can just go from one sport to weightlifting. And it really, in my eyes, it makes a guy I've looked up to forever. And one of the big reasons I've done so many different strength sports, Mikhail Koklayev from Russia.
Misha.
Yeah, he started in weightlifting. And that base, once he added the absolute strength part of it to it, which Russians are almost always absolute strong compared to most weightlifters in the world.
They're Russians.
Right. It's part of the culture there.
Yeah.
But it's why he could go out and do other things while still winning national titles in Russia in weightlifting. He could still go do that and then go to World's Strongest Man and be in the top 10 best strongmen in the world.
The only comparable strength athlete in the world is Mark Henry. Him and Misha are up here in terms of competing at a high level across multiple strength sports, and then there's everybody else.
Yep. I don't think Mark Henry did much strongman. He did a lot of strongman feats.
He won the very first Arnold.
Okay, yeah, he did that. That's true. So he was definitely very accomplished there. But Misha did it a lot more.
Certainly. He did it for longer. I think the story goes, don't quote me directly on here, that Mark Henry, extremely strong, physically talented, ended up going the WWE route for money.
Mm-hmm.
But what I understand is he wanted to do the Arnold on a whim just for fun, and he trained for about 6 weeks. And he was just so much physically stronger than everybody there that he went out and won it, having no real competitive strongman experience.
What was that, back in like 2000, 2001 or something?
01 or 02. It was the inaugural, which I don't even think it was called the Arnold Classic then, or whatever they call it now, the Strongman at the Arnold, or it had a different name. It was still related to Arnold and at the Arnold, same lineage, but yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't think there's much debate at all as far as the most.
He beat Phil Pfister, if I'm not mistaken, who was the reigning world's strongest man.
Yeah. Well, we know the Arnold contest has a lot more static.
Right.
So
It certainly.
That helps fit to somebody that's more powerlifting strong.
Absolutely.
But I don't think there's any debate for the person that had the most potential as far as being strongest person in the world in Mark Henry.
Right, yeah.
It's hard to argue that one at all. His weightlifting technique wasn't that good.
No.
He was strong.
Yeah, he was.
He was deadlifting 930 pounds soon after high school or something like that.
He squatted and deadlifted in the 900s before other people were doing it, 15 years later.
Yeah. Nobody told him that wasn't really special.
Yeah.
But
I bench more than him, though.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
There's my thing.
There you go. Take that one to the grave.
That's right.
But when you have things like that, crossing over to multiple sports, Koklayev actually briefly held the weight over bar record in the Highland Games as well.
Oh, wow.
I think the implement he used weighed in at like an ounce light or something like that, so it wasn't allowed.
Oh, goodness.
But he was competing and doing that
right.
at a world level. So that's 4 different sports that he was doing. And I just saw a video of him boxing last night professionally.
Alexander Emelianenko.
Right.
Fedor's little brother.
Yeah. Good job to Alex for getting in shape.
Yeah.
He looked a lot better.
He did look good.
But he's always been a real big hero of mine, just for longevity and being able to be that broad of a strength athlete. I don't think really that anybody's ever going to match that again. Nowadays everybody's so specialist, and people seem to be specializing at a younger age, which is something I've noticed, and I say a lot of times in regards to powerlifting. The overall participation pool is increasing, and with the rise of social media, whereas it seems in the older days, powerlifting was kind of a last-ditch place for people to compete once they had gone through high school football, maybe they played college, maybe they got a pro tryout, maybe they didn't. They exhausted all avenues in traditional sports, and powerlifting was there. Now you're seeing people see their favorite powerlifter with 1 million subscribers on YouTube or whatever, and they're starting to say, maybe I want to pursue that at a younger age, and again, more participation, and you're seeing the talent levels really kind of go through the roof. For sure. And then there's also the dark side of that as well, especially with a lot of our youth athletes that we see. Baseball is always the common example of that, in that parents will have their kids start focusing on baseball and playing baseball year round, and
Been there, done that.
Yeah, a lot of the coaches, especially D1 high level coaches in football, baseball, basketball, whatever, they're not looking to see kids who have grown up playing one thing. Obviously, they're looking at talent and all those other things.
Right.
But if they see someone who has competed in several different sports, it makes them a more well-rounded athlete, and likely gives them a higher potential ceiling as far as how successful they can be in that specified sport once they get older. I think, what's his name? Urban from Ohio State before he retired.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot his first
Urban
name.
Meyer.
Yeah, Urban Meyer. He has a famous quote, is, I don't want to see someone that only played football. I want to see a well-rounded athlete we can make into a better football player. And that's a huge swing in the last probably 10 years that we're seeing in the college level, and it really carries over into professional level too.
Right.
If you go through and look at their resumes at the professional level, so many of those guys were multi-sport athletes. So don't be afraid to lose a little bit of specificity and not train the same sport forever because you think your kid's going to only...
Especially early on.
Yeah.
With youth development, you want them to be well-rounded.
It actually, on top of being better athletes in general and being able to perform better, if you just do the same sport over and over and over again, especially for pitchers, that's the,
in a hurry.
Yeah. But those are really the things that cause kids to have injuries, like we were talking about. That if you have high pitch counts and you don't have that time away, the off season, to get healed up. And one extra thing on the pitchers: if you get your kid Tommy John surgery, he's not going to throw 10 miles an hour faster. Guaranteed. You see people in the pros who have been throwing for 10, 15, 20 years. They get Tommy John, and then their fastball goes back up 7 or 8 miles an hour. It's not because it made them better. It put them back to where they were healthy. They were able to throw that before, and then as they got more injured, their velocities went down, and then it helped them get back to where they were. There's no magic there. So don't put your kids through unnecessary surgeries.
Right.